All right. Hello, everybody. How is it going? Welcome to week 2 of Healthspan Hacks, How Not to Die. So most of you probably don't know me. My name is Courtney. I work at Boulder Longevity Institute with Dr. Yerth, and I manage a lot of our relationships and our partnerships with really awesome people who we get to collaborate with, like Lisa. And so I've gotten to know Lisa really well as well over the last several months. And they invited me to join this week just to kind of help as a moderator. Dr. Yerth and Lisa could probably talk for hours. And so this is just to make sure that we respect all of our audience's time and keep everyone on track. So that's really why I am here. So for those of you, keeping people in line. So for those of you that had the opportunity to join us last week, we talked a lot about resiliency and the importance of mindset when it comes to your health. And kind of collectively, we all felt like this was a really good place to start because everything else that you're going to hear about over the next couple of weeks, it really doesn't matter if you have the wrong mindset and if you don't kind of take a resilient approach to your health. So hopefully you guys got to tune in and check that out. We will be sharing all the videos at the end for everybody who missed different episodes and different webinars. And if you missed that resiliency episode, definitely check it out. So this week, we're going to kind of dive in a little bit more. This theme is all around education, and we'll be diving in a bit deeper to some of the details of how do you measure and how do you actually track key metrics of health. And most importantly, what should you really be paying attention to when it comes to longevity, when it comes to health span? There's a lot of data out there, and I think it can easily become overwhelming of what you actually pay attention to. So this is kind of to guide you and give you a little bit more education on what to be paying attention to. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Yerth and Lisa, and you guys can dive right in, and I'll be back at the end to kind of close us out.
Thanks, Courtney.
Thanks, Courtney.
Absolutely brilliant. And so today we're going to jump right into labs, looking at your blood work today. And I know I've learned everything I know about labs from you, and I know how important this is. And this is my sort of number one thing that I do with my clients, if possible, is to get some good lab work done, because there is just so much gold in your sort of standard blood tests that people just don't understand. We don't necessarily always need the most expensive tests out there. This is a really good place to start, and it's cheap and it's usually easy. We can talk about accessibility of it. But Dr. Yerth, you take it away, because blood work is really such an invaluable tool for us, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And I think that the problem is when a doctor gets labs, and you're familiar with this, Lisa, when, so your client comes to you with labs and everything looks great, right? The doctor told them everything was fine. And then you look at them and you're like, there's some things we can work on. Because when a physician looks at labs, they look at, what a reference range is. So when you understand labs, understand that the people outside of the reference range in general, oftentimes those are sick people. So if you look at labs as a bell-shaped curve, right? Well, the people who are, on the bottom or the top of that bell-shaped curve oftentimes aren't in the, what we call optimal, which is going to be this much smaller range, right? So you guys come to us with labs that are like, look, there's no little red marks. Everything looks perfect. And then we start going, well, yeah, not bad, but let's optimize. So the very first thing everybody needs to understand is the difference between normal and optimal, right? At least it's like, I think in anything in your life, right? What's normal and what's optimal is a pretty big reach.
Sorry. And this is the whole premise of what we do, really, is all about prevention. And so if you can see trend lines, if you get your blood work done over a period of time, every few months, for example, and you can see trend lines as well, and you can see that things are going in the wrong direction, then we can go, whoops. And then there's also the whole thing about the ratios and stuff, which is what I found fascinating. So you can be within the reference range for two separate pieces of information, but actually when you look at the ratio, it's not so great, So there's all this sort of detail of information that isn't being looked at. And, I think that's what we want to dive into today, is sort of, on a basic level. Obviously learning this stuff is quite complex, but we can learn quite a lot just at a basic level to open up lines of conversation.
Sorry, I'm losing my voice, but and I'm trying to drink some tea here, but
I've got my keto drink this morning, so I've got my energy.
I think the easiest way to do this for you guys might be just to share a set of labs. And actually if you see the patient's name on here, I actually got permission from him, since he's my son, to use his labs. When you look at his labs, he looks pretty perfect. And it's because he's a 24-year-old guy. So, yes, his labs look pretty good, but I didn't want to share some of my bad patients' labs. So we got permission. So if you see his name, it's okay. So let me just share this screen with you, because I want to show you guys the way Lisa and I might look at a lab that might be a little different than how your doctor does, and why there's some critical pieces of information there that would really help you guys to know. It's funny, like Lisa and I shared a client who has cancer, and it was funny because he was looking at his labs and he was looking at one value going, well, this is really bad. Look, this value changed. And then I looked at labs and I said, actually, you've shown some really nice trends in a good direction that make me feel very confident here that we are going in the right direction. So even from a perspective, sometimes your doctor may only ignore some of the things that are really good as well.
Yeah.
Let me share my screen and kind of just briefly walk you through this. And you don't have to understand everything. You don't have to, come out if you're an expert, but I want you guys to understand that when you look at a lab, now this is what's called a CBC, or a complete blood count. And almost every one of you will have this test done by your physician on a yearly basis or so, right? This is just a very nut and bolt basic test. So people always think, oh, you got to get all these fancy tests. You don't. This is an inexpensive test that everybody does, but they oftentimes don't look at it with the same eye that we might. So when you look at this complete blood count, it's giving you a lot of information, but there's a few pieces you kind of want to pick apart. So the first thing is your body's made up of different cells, and really your white blood cells and your red blood cells. And your red blood cells are the cells that carry oxygen. So hemoglobin and hematocrit are reflective of sort of the oxygen carrying capacity of your cells. If you live like I do at a high altitude, you're going to have a higher hemoglobin and hematocrit than you might be at a low altitude. If you're an ultra endurance athlete, you probably have better oxygen carrying capacity than somebody who doesn't run all the time. So those are little things that might be affected by simply where you live or activities that you do. But they also tell us things like, are you anemic? Is your body not producing enough red blood cells for an issue? So when you look at the red blood cell count, an ideal would be somewhere in the mid-range, but you want hemoglobin hematocrit, depending on where you are and what you do, to potentially maybe be on a little bit on that higher end. So if I were, somebody who was trying to do sports and I don't have enough oxygen carrying capacity in my cells. So when you look at a hemoglobin number, like Brian here, you want to be up in kind of the upper range in an ideal world. Now, women are going to be a little lower than men, so we won't have as much. So those are again, optimization. If I'm down here and your doc's like, oh, you're fine, you're at 13.7. That's probably not fine. You probably want to be more mid to upper range in these numbers. But one of the most important things when we look at it, what happens as we age is our immune systems start to fail. And we've all experienced that with COVID, right? Who got really sick from COVID, who passed away from COVID, mostly older or ill people. And that's because their immune systems were not intact. So how do we evaluate whether your immune system is intact so that you can fight off COVID? And other bad disease like cancer. Cancer is dependent on a healthy immune system. Your immune cells are your soldiers. When they see an abnormal cell, their goal is to get rid of that abnormal cell, be it, a virus or something like that, but also even your own body's cells. So when you look at a white blood cell count, you really want that to be, probably somewhere in more the mid-range as well. You probably ideally want to see that number at least 4.5 and up to about 7.5. It starts to get on the higher end. That might not be a good thing. So somewhere kind of in that mid-range. But most importantly are these groups of cells down here. I'll put them at the top of the page. These guys right here. The neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. Those are the population that makes up your white blood cells, right? So if I want to really look at optimal immune health, I really want most of my cells to be these guys, neutrophils and lymphocytes. Those are your soldiers, right? So if your doc were to look at your white blood cell count and all these numbers were fine, but let's say only 70% of your cells were in neutrophils and lymphocytes, and 30% were made up of these guys. Something's wrong, right? It means your immune system is starting to fail, and you're more in an inflammatory state. These cells come into play when there's an active inflammation, some process going on that the body's fighting, be that environmental exposures, be it dietary exposures, be it molds, be it viruses, injuries, whatever. These guys come into play. So in a perfect world, you'd want almost all of your cells, 90% in neutrophils and lymphocytes, right? So when you look here and you kind of say, okay, he's got 90% up here in neutrophils and lymphocytes, but he's a young kid, that's right. And then less than 10% in these guys. These are considered your more inflammatory reactive cells. So that's something really important to take note. Because if I look at the one system that when it starts failing you, is going to increase your risk of every disease in the book, it's your immune health. Right, Lisa? I mean,
absolutely.
When you look at, you guys just got through COVID and, you know, and you all got hit hard, but certainly your mom, at her age and having fought cancer and things like that, her immune system is not going to be as vigilant. So,
and we sort of knew that she would be struggling because her lymphocyte count was so low.
Right. She had a low lymphocyte count because she'd been through some chemotherapy and things like that for her cancer. So you have to try and boost that up. Right. So there's things we try and do to try and improve immune health or to try and help people along so their immune systems, simple things, right? Like vitamin C. Vitamin C will help produce more lymphocytes, help immune system, even hyperbaric, those kind of techniques. There's a lot of supplements that we can take that will actually help improve lymphocyte counts. There's lots of things we can do, but you have to know it's there. I may be going along feeling great, but my lymphocyte count is really low, right? And I see that a lot. I'm a little over 60 and, and then our immune system starts to decline young. So that's a really important number to keep in mind, guys. You want to see a lot of your cells appear in neutrophils and lymphocytes. And in a perfect world, you would actually see an equal number of neutrophils and lymphocytes. So even if you look at Ryan here, who's a healthy 24-year-old, he doesn't really have that. He's a little skewed, right? He's already got a little bit of drop in lymphocytes. And when you look here, see how his monocyte count is a little higher? So something low grade, even in this young person, is starting to cause a little inflammation. We don't know what that is, right? It can be overexercise. Like when you were running your events, right? Your immune system
would have been interesting.
Yeah, your immune system takes its toll. Ultra endurance athletes are not the healthiest bunch.
No, right? That's why I don't do it anymore.
Right. It really is. It takes a huge toll on your body. It is good to build resiliency. It's good to build,
mental toughness and all that.
Build toughness, but it's not so good for your body. And I treat a lot of athletes who overtrain. When you see overtraining, you'll see this picture. You'll see this lymphocyte count get suppressed. You'll see the monocytes go up. Those people are in a constant state of inflammation. So even you guys who are super healthy, fit, athletic people can look at this and go, I maybe need to change something. I am doing something not quite right. Maybe it's my diet. Maybe it's my training.
Yep. And this is crucial, like in that neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. I mean, in an ideal world, you'd have it sort of 1-to-1 or at least 1.5 to 1. But honestly, there's so many people, so much blood work that I see where that's really skewed. Really skewed, like 3 to 1 or 4 to 1.
Yeah, exactly.
And like you say, the monocytes and eosinophils and basophils, they're sort of more, acute phase reactants. There's something going on. We need to. And you don't feel this.
You don't feel it, right? You can feel perfectly well.
Yeah,
and that's why
this is why I'm so excited about blood work. Because if we can get every doctor on board and the health system on board with taking everybody's blood work every 3 months, it's like I liken it to driving a car with your dashboard. You got our fancy new cars. We've got all this information about what's the temperature, what's the fuel gauge, what's the speed that we're going, all of this information, and yet we drive our bodies around with no information. And we've got the ability to do that now, and there are fabulous tests that are coming out. We'll be able to do a lot of this at home, which is really exciting. It's coming. But even sort of monitoring your own blood work, blood sugar levels and things like that, but also this sort of stuff on at least a regular basis.
On a regular basis, right. And this is because your immune system is one of the main things that's going to fail you as you age. You need to I love the car analogy because, if that little red warning light comes on, you're like, shoot, I better do something versus you're out in the middle of nowhere and all of a sudden your car just dies, right? We need the warning signals. And like I said, 90% of people who have these little skews in blood work, they're going around feeling, I'm great, I'm super healthy, I'm super fit, and there's no problems at all. And they do. It's just those problems haven't arisen. That's where we want to get involved, right? That's where we need to be saying, okay, there's stuff starting. Let's nip it in the bud before it's a disease state. So the only way you guys can know that is to be able to measure it. You can't really know what you can't measure. And so that's why it's so useful to get these kinds of tests, right? Yep. Here's another one. You know, I don't know how many of you guys have listened to a lot of Lisa's podcasts, but you've probably heard about what we call cell senescence, or what we call zombie cells, right? We know that one of the things that happens as we age is our old cells are designed to kill themselves, right? It's autophagy. And so Lisa and I preach a lot of things that induce autophagy. It might be intermittent fasting. It might be taking certain supplements like spermidine, rapamycin, fisetin, right? Quercetin, all supplements that can actually help induce autophagy. Basically, kill your bad cells, kill themselves off. They're like, oh, okay, I'm too far gone and kill myself off, right? So our cells are designed, they get too far gone, too much damage. They're designed to kill themselves off and go away. If they don't, they stick around. And when they stick around, in my world, we call them zombie cells because they actually spew out these proteins that damage the cells around them. So basically, you have these old damaged cells that are now damaging the cells around them. And we know that that's another of the big causes of aging, is the accumulation of the zombies. So one zombie cell begets another. So now you have, so I like to picture sort of this person filling up with zombies, right? And, and once the zombie are up to here, you're dead, right? Probably before that. So zombie cells induce a lot of bad diseases. We know that a lot of diseases can be linked to cell senescence. So how can we kind of, a simplistic way of looking at cell senescence is to look at the size of the cells. Older, more damaged cells are bigger. So you can actually look at this number right here, this MCV. It stands for mean cell volume. Put that at the top of my screen here. So right here, MCV, mean cell volume. It's the average size of the cell. If my cells are young and healthy like this, you can have a lower number. Our goal is to always keep that number below 92. If you look at most people as they age, that number gets a little higher, a little larger, a little larger, a little larger. In a normal, like this is kind of a lab that's built a little bit more around anti-aging, but like for you guys, your normal doctor, a normal MCV can go up to like 102, right? And they call that normal. It's not normal.
No.
It basically, we want to keep that number always below 92. If you're starting to see it climb, you're starting to have more damaged cells. Your immune system starting to fail. So those are look, I mean, from one blood test, you've learned my immune system is failing. Where's my oxygen carrying capacity? Am I in an inflammatory state or a healthy state? And am I starting to fill up with zombies? Those are all things that are paramount to aging healthy, right?
And this isn't just for older people. Like I've got a client at the moment. He's young, fit, apparently healthy, got an MCV over 103. And we're trying to work out, and she's not feeling good. She's not feeling, and the doctor's going, everything's normal. And I'm going, no, it's not normal. And we've got to dig deeper as to why is this young woman dealing with this sort of thing. But that's a really strong indication. And now that we've measured it, we can go after it.
Go after it, right. So if we see that number high, like in that patient, one of the first things you actually look at is actually B vitamins, like B vitamins, B12, folate. Those are very dependent on this. So those have to be. And then, and then when you start to say, okay, well, those are normal and this is still off, where do we go? Then you start looking deeper, but it drives you to look deeper to find these things. So like even in Ryan, who's 24 and super healthy, you're like, you know what? Something is causing a little low-grade inflammation in you, right? The lymphocytes are a little bit low. We'd rather see those around 40. We'd rather see those monocytes a little lower. Something's creating a little bit of low-grade inflammation. This is a kid who goes to the gym every day. He rock climbs. He's super fit. He's super healthy. He feels great. But there's something, right? So lots of information. That's what we really want to emphasize. This is an easy test to do that your doctor will look at very differently. You guys need to understand this stuff, or see somebody like Lisa, somebody who understands this stuff, so that actually you can take control of what your future is going to be. Doctors are designed to be there when you get really sick. Our goal is to not ever have to see them, right?
Exactly, and be in that preventative space. And what's fantastic is you have this test, which is relatively simple. Although I do battle every week with doctors going, "Why do you want these tests?" Because I send my clients off to get these tests, and then there's like pushback often. And my advice would be find a functional doctor, find someone who's into functional medicine, which isn't easy, by the way, especially when you live in New Zealand.
Yeah, especially in New Zealand, and much easier in the United States than it is. But we see patients, we see clients from all over the world, and and it's always a little tricky getting labs, but lots of times Lisa sort of assists with that, and then and where you can
find ways.
You find ways around some of this very basic stuff. Maybe not everything I would want, but at least some of the very basic stuff, like these 2 labs, any lab can do. So this is the other lab that a lot of you are just going to get. This is going to be in your basic, lab work that you get every year. Even if you have a doctor who does very little, they're going to order these 2 things. So this is called a comprehensive metabolic panel. And this also gives us a lot of information. It tells you what your kidneys are doing, your liver is doing, what your nutrition is like. So the first pieces up here are sort of just the electrolytes, sodium, potassium, chloride. They're kind of just looking at basic electrolytes. But this carbon dioxide number is kind of important because people in a healthier immune state and a healthier state overall are more alkaline. You've probably talked to your patients about this, Lisa. So more alkaline environment, right? That doesn't mean, just eating alkaline foods. There's some acidic foods that are good for you, but the alkaline environment is much better for our immune system. So an ideal carbon dioxide level is going to be 24 or above. If that number is starting to edge down to 18, then you're a little more acidic. Why are you acidic? Maybe it's that you're training super hard. Maybe it's that you eat a lot of protein. Maybe it's that, your kidneys aren't working. We don't know, but there's things you can do to encourage just being more alkaline. Simple thing is do a little baking soda, a little teaspoon of baking soda in water. That will help.
It's great for athletes, by the way.
It's really good for athletes. And the Tour de France, the Tour de France people learned this years ago. They started all using sodium bicarb, basically, which is baking soda, and just using that before races. And then they went to Alka-Seltzer Gold, which is sodium potassium bicarb, which is even a little bit more effective. And and now a company called Amp Human actually makes the sodium potassium bicarb you can rub on muscles. So they all started doing this and actually did start performing better because you don't get as much lactic acid buildup. So you don't get as sore, you don't get as fatigue, you have better muscle recovery. So Tour de France guys really got into this, and you probably learn this in your, the endurance athletes have learned this little trick. I always do I take 2 Alka-Seltzer Gold, and I drink them before I do a hard workout, because if I'm weightlifting too, I'm going to break down muscle, I'm going to get more acidosis. If I want to be able to perform hard the next day, I need to be able to recover fast. And so that's something your doctor probably never looks at. That's helpful. Is this number in the higher end or is it in the lower end? The next numbers here that are important, and kidney function is one of the first organs that really starts to go as we age. And it's such a critical organ because it's involved in all of your detoxification processes, right? So if your kidney function is starting to decline, that's not a good sign. Anybody, for instance, who has poor vascular health, the kidneys will reflect that. The kidneys are very dependent on vascular health. So if you're diabetic, if you have some cardiovascular disease, the kidneys are going to show that. So first number you want to look at when you look at the kidneys is this what's called GFR, or glomerular filtration rate. And you can see that it says normal is greater than 60, and that is normal. Some of your labs may even say greater than 50, but what's optimal? If I really want optimal kidney function, it's going to be greater than 80. So if that number is starting to decline below 80, is it still normal? My kidneys are still functioning? Yes. But that cues me in, something's going a little wrong, right? That kidney function has dropped. And, again, then you got to search and say, what is it? Maybe the vascular health's not great, right? Maybe nutritionally they're missing things. Maybe they're overtraining. Maybe they're, maybe they're too acidic. So those are all things that can affect, high glucose diets, high carb diets will stress. So will too much protein. So you have these athletes who are trying to get 200 grams of protein in, which I agree with. You need a lot of protein. But if you eat that in one big stack, like if I sat down and ate 100 grams of protein, it's a big stress to my kidneys. So I see this a lot in my my bodybuilders, weightlifters, that you'll see that they're pounding so much protein at one time that they're stressing their kidneys about it.
And the ultra marathon runners, coming from that background, rhabdomyolysis is a thing that we get quite. I mean, I don't know, I can't even count how many dozens of times I ended up with rhabdomyolysis, breaking down of muscles. So if you are an endurance athlete, this is something that you need to be aware of. And it's taken me a long time to get my kidney function back to where it should be.
Yeah, you see that a lot. So what she's talking about is when you beat your muscles up, you're running for a long distance, you get muscle breakdown. When muscles break down, they actually release something called creatine phosphokinase, and that has to be eliminated by your kidneys. Well, if too much of that gets released from the muscle, so you have too much muscle breakdown because you just ran, through the Sahara Desert. If you have too much muscle breakdown, the kidneys can't handle it. And so you actually stress the kidneys, and you actually kidneys can fail. So we'll see people after these events in frank kidney failure, right?
Yeah.
Put them on dialysis temporarily sometimes because they're in frank kidney failure, but it can leave a very permanent toll on the kidneys and trying to get the kidneys to recover. So those are important things. Overtraining, hard training even can lead to kidney problems. And so you have to look at that. Staying hydrated is helpful there. But that's when she's talking about here, this creatinine number that will be elevated. Like if I looked at you after a race, you would see that creatinine number sometimes way up, right?
Breaking down all that muscle.
Breaking down muscle, right? And your kidneys can't handle that amount anymore, then your function actually starts to decline. So those are really, really important numbers to look at. If you see these really high, this creatinine number really high, the blood urea nitrogen really high, the kidneys aren't able to keep up with whatever stress you're putting them to, right? So what else? Lisa and I talked about albumin, and
yeah, love albumin.
Albumin is actually a really important marker to follow. So we get albumin primarily from our protein intake. So sometimes albumin levels are low simply because people don't eat enough protein, right? So sometimes you'll look, particularly elderly people, they're not getting adequate protein for what they need. We actually have markedly increased what we think older people need for protein. In fact, an article literally came out 2 days ago. And it was funny because one of the women who works in my office, who was a little on the older side, we were just talking, broke her hip, and she's osteoporotic. And when I looked at her protein intake, she was probably getting 30 grams a day. And so that's one of the reasons she has osteoporosis, is that low protein intake. Because we see older adults lots of times not taking in a lot of protein, right? They're not eating as much. They sometimes favor carbs. And so if you're not getting adequate protein, you'll just see the albumin level go down. Why is albumin so important? Well, it's a carrier molecule to get a lot of important things to your cell. It helps make up the blood-brain barrier. So the blood-brain barrier will be more leaky when the albumin level is lower.
That's a key one.
When you start to see this number drop, you know that you're putting the brain at more risk too. So it's a very important marker of kind of overall health. If somebody is, so the first thing I try and fix is if the total protein is low. So if I saw somebody with an albumin level of 3.5, let's say, but their total protein was only 6, I'd say, okay, we just got to get more protein into you. And sometimes that's using really good, easily accessible things like eggs are great, right?
Egg whites.
Egg whites, right? Egg whites are a really good source of albumin. But sometimes it's not that people aren't taking enough protein. It's that they're not processing. There's something else going on. Sometimes the liver is not working right. So some other disease states going on. So sometimes you have to look a little deeper. But for those of you guys who are looking at these numbers, if your albumin level is above 4.7, that's a really good health factor. It's lower than that, not so good. Now, can it get too high? Now, this guy's a young kid. His is going to be high. If you start seeing albumin level, like 5.8, 6, there might be something wrong. So then you have to start delving deeper for looking at cancers and things like that. But this is just because this is a fit, healthy guy, and he's got nice protein intake. So he's got a nice high albumin. That's what we want to see it. Now, people my age in their 60s, my goal, keep it above 4.7, but I'm at 5.1 because I eat a lot of protein. Really,
that's amazing. Because it is quite hard to get this up.
It's hard to get enough protein, right? Yeah. It is. Yeah. If you look at how much protein people need, most older people need at least 100 grams of protein, right? And that's hard to do.
Yeah, it is.
Hard for me to do is,
Yeah, I find it hard to get, keep my albumin levels up at times, and also, I get a egg white protein powder.
Right, egg white protein powders. Yeah, I'm using protein shakes, things like that. Right. Yep. Yeah, you need easily. I just went through this with the guy I was talking about in our office. I said, okay, here's some easy bone broth, right? 10 grams of protein, a little, cup size of bone broth. You just got 10 grams of protein, easily digested proteins. So those are easy ways to get protein in through your day. And remember, you can't take it all at once or you'll stress the kidneys. But if your albumin levels above 4.7, it takes about 5 years off your cell age. So it's an important number to look at.
Isn't that amazing? And this is one of the longevity markers that
right, it's a longevity marker, exactly.
We look at if it's low, then you're probably going to die quicker than someone who's got it at really high level.
And actually very compellingly so.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
I know, acute patients in the hospital, when the albumin level really starts to go south, then we know that this person's really
they're not going to make it. Yeah, they did a study on that, looking at when albumin levels started to get like down into the threes, below 3. Those people rarely got out of the hospital. So once it dropped down below 3, lots of times those people, they just were obviously too sick. They were not going to recover. So this is a really good marker that you guys can easily look at to say, look, I'm in a really good state here, from a longevity perspective. So again, simple things: know your kidney function, know what your albumin levels are. And then the last piece here is your liver. So these are called liver transaminases here, AST and ALT. Again, talk about important detox. One of the most important detox organs is our liver. And you can be going along with 0 symptoms with a horrible fatty liver that's not working well.
Yeah.
Or those of you guys who drink alcohol. Alcohol is a big stress to the liver. I don't care.
Yeah.
Even if you're a modest alcohol drinker, it is a big stress to the liver. So you're going along and you're like, I'm fine, I don't drink that much. Then when we look at your liver functions, you're like, your liver would say otherwise, right?
Yeah, and they could just be one glass a day, one glass of wine on the, having that regularly or daily, especially when you're older and you're unable to it's unfortunately, it is. But it isn't good for you, It
isn't good for you, right?
There is no reason to be, doing
that. I know, everybody hears that, a little bit of wine is good for you. Actually, we're kind of changing that. We actually don't think. I mean, I'm not going to say nobody should ever have a glass of wine. You're celebrating, holidays and say, I have a glass of wine, but this should not be part of your regular regimen. It is too hard on your body. So, liver transaminases will give you a little clue here. These should be in the lower end. They should be mid to lower end. Once they start climbing into the 40s, the liver's not doing well. I actually developed an autoimmune liver disease 20 years ago, and it did a lot of, in fact, my liver numbers, and I felt fine, honestly, completely fine. And I randomly got some blood work. It's starting to feel really fatigued. And so I've got some blood work done. My liver enzymes were in the thousands, right? And I felt fine, and they were in the thousands. And, so you do this big workup, and trying to be this weird autoimmune thing, which fortunately has gotten better, but it did a little damage to my liver. So my liver is a little more fragile. I try and keep my numbers right in the 40 range, but they don't usually go lower than that. So the liver is, number one, wonderfully forgiving. I could bring my labs from 1,000 to 40 until there's enough damage done. And, so those people who develop, fatty liver disease, we need to work on that. We need to reverse that, because the liver is way too important to your overall longevity and health. So again, look at these numbers. You want the mid to low range. These are things your doctor's going to go, oh, you're at 45. Well, that's okay. Probably not.
Not really. No.
And the last thing I want you guys to look at is this alkaline phosphatase. Really, I actually did just a little Instagram post about this, because an article just came out that was really interesting. This is even in like your 20-year-olds, that when alkaline phosphatase started climbing above in younger people, above 50, in people my age, above 65, it was a marker of bone loss. So even in a young age, we're seeing these women, younger women, especially women who are dieting a lot, and potentially not eating enough protein and things like that, training a lot, training hard, don't have periods, things like that. So if that alk phos in a 20-year-old is 70, they're experiencing bone loss. There's damage going on already. So this was a study done 20 to 40-year-olds, and they found that bone climb. This is a straight up curve like this. 50, you were at your best. Above that, there was bone loss occurring. So it's a really easy marker for those of you who can't get bone density studies done, right? You can't get a DEXA scan, which is a little harder in your country sometimes. Now I can look at my alk phos and go, wow, my alk phos is 95. That's not so good. Something might be going on. Maybe now I can, find somewhere I can get a test done, or at least start taking some proactive measures to protect my bones, right?
Yeah. Or it can be a signal, that something else is really awry when it's really, really high with some of our,
right, cancers, things like that, right? Yeah, this is one of the things we were looking at in your cancer patient who had some metastasis to the bone. So when you see these numbers like, 200, I was saying my dad had prostate cancer that metastatic to the bone. When I looked at his alk phos numbers, they were, in the thousands. So I knew something was bad,
absolutely
right?
Horrific.
So this is a nice little marker to fall to. So now, again, I looked at a very basic lab test that you guys can pull out the ones that you've had in the past and go, I know about my kidney health. I know about whether I'm acidic or alkaline. I know my protein and albumin, and that's a big marker of how long I'm going to live. I know if my liver is working well, and I can say a little bit about my bone density. So tons of information. So 2 tests here, we just give you a ton of information, right?
And that's without even looking at, cholesterols and
cholesterol and stuff like that.
Yeah. Which is also pretty standard. And we can go far more into the detail on those as well,
Yeah. So ideally, so this is and this is a big, unfortunately, a harder thing for you guys than us here in the US, because it's much easier to get lab work for us. So your typical doctor will order basic what you see up here, right? They're looking at these numbers right here: the total cholesterol, the HDL, the LDLs, and the triglycerides. And they go, oh, your total cholesterol's fine, and your HDLs are fine, your LDLs are fine. So they would look at this lab and say, wow, this is perfect, right? Now I would look at this lab in a 24-year-old male and say, actually, his cholesterol is too low. So we know that once cholesterol levels start dropping below 140, that basically there's something from a nice lipid, the good fats that you need for your brain and your nerves and making hormones, right? Those good fats are probably a little deficient. So I would look at a 167 in a young guy like this and go, something's maybe missing a little bit, right? And even though your doctor would say, oh, this is great. And in fact, great study that was done 2 years ago, biggest cholesterol study ever done, 13 million people.
Wow.
Optimal cholesterol for just not dying. This is called How Not to Die. Optimal cholesterol to just not die, 220 to 250.
Yeah, way higher.
Way higher, right?
Yeah. And it's what your cholesterol's made up of. That's important.
It's your cholesterol. So all you guys who are, you go in and your cholesterol's 220, your doc says, oh, you need to be on this medication to lower cholesterol. That may not be true.
Statin.
It's a statin drug, right? And and so how do you peel apart now what is good and what is bad? Because we always have heard the HDL is good and LDLs are bad, right? And that's probably very, very simplistic and not true. So even if you just have this lab panel right here, one of the best markers, actually another study just came out last week too, looking at if you just had a basic cholesterol panel, what would you look at as the sort of best marker? And it was actually the triglyceride HDL ratio, right? So the triglycerides divided by the HDLs, you ideally want that number less than 1.5, ideally 1.2 to 1. So if you look at this, he's about 1 to 1, so he's good. If you see high triglycerides, oftentimes those are your people who are eating tons of sugar and carbohydrates, right?
Yeah, not necessarily fat.
Not necessarily
people
fat,
go immediately, oh, I've got to cut back on my fats. It's like, check your carbs. Are you drinking fruit juice? Are you eating chocolate? And, it's those carbs that can really get that triglyceride
exactly.
up.
Triglycerides will go way up in your big carb eaters, right? And then alcohol, big culprit there. Remember, alcohol is just straight sugar. It's just straight sugar. So, so when I see,
don't correlate that with your cholesterol.
We don't correlate that, right? Exactly. So your doctor's going to see a high triglyceride and go, oh, stop eating meat. No, you need to look at your carb intake when that triglyceride level is really high, right?
That's so important. And then running cholesterol's too low when you've got, say, so people like mum who's had an aneurysm and a stroke and brain damage from cancer and operations and so on. If we run our cholesterol too low, and we've had to put statins in the mix to fight the cancer side of the equation. But if we run them too low, then we're going to be impacting her peripheral circulation, or we're going to be impacting her brain and her blood-brain barrier and her brain function. So it's not, we need good fats. Fats have been vilified in our world for far too long. We need to have the good fats. We all know that there's good and there's bad fats, and we definitely want to have that, good fats, which are, your butters and your olive oils and your coconut oils and your, not
so avocados,
not
and
your
nuts
cheap vegetable oils.
Right. Not, getting away from your seed oils and, those are bad fats, right? Those kinds of things are not good for you, saturated fats. And, but you're right that the brain is mostly lipids. It's one of our most lipid dense organs. So when you look at people with dementia, a lot more of them have very low cholesterol. And it's one of the reasons, and I'm not nobody should ever be on statin drug person. I think they have some uses like with your mom for cancer, I think there's some, but in general, if I put someone on statin, I'm actually lowering all their cholesterol, good and bad. It's not selective, right? So why do those people then develop dementia? People are like, well, statins aren't the cause of the brain problems. It is because you've actually lowered the good levels of lipids that the brain thrives on, that making hormones thrives on. you cannot make hormones when your cholesterol gets below 140. You can't make hormones.
Exactly. Hormones. I mean, elephant in the room. This is like, this is where our hormones come from. And yet,
Right.
again,
That's right. Cholesterol. These are cholesterol hormones, right?
Yeah.
So this is a big beef that Lisa and I have. Like when people come in and they're, and they come in with these low cholesterols, and you're like, and the doctors are thrilled, right? They're thrilled. We're like, not so thrilled. So I would even argue, okay, where, and what I told him when I saw these labs was, you need to start pushing more good fats into your diet. You need to start, getting more salmon and omega-3s and good fats into your diet. Now, these are tests that are much harder for you guys to get, but if you get one sort of test that would give you probably the best information about your cardiovascular risk, it would be this. It would be the apolipoproteins. And I don't know if you guys can get this at all. I don't,
we often get apolipo protein A and not the B for some reason. And sometimes we manage to get both. I managed to get both because I've got a functional doctor, but it's pretty hard. This is the breakdown of what is, what are your good fats and which are your bad fats.
Right, exactly. So think about apolipoprotein B. I like to simplistically think of it as a little sack that holds all the bad stuff. Apolipoprotein A, a little sack that holds all the good stuff. So the best measure of cardiovascular risk is the bad to good ratio, not HDLs to LDLs, but the B to A. B being everything bad, A everything good. When that number gets above 0.9, those are high risk people. Ideally, you want to keep it less than 0.6. So we want to keep it, less than 0.6. So, and so if I see somebody who has maybe even a normal cholesterol, you see this a lot, right? They have a normal cholesterol, but their BA ratio is horrible because their normal cholesterol is made up of all bad stuff. So we don't want to lower cholesterol. We want to shift the bad to the good. And there's things that will help do that, like niacin. Niacin is a really nice way to do that. Citronol, which is found in some berries and walnuts and things, but also as a supplement you guys probably can't get, but is also a nice way to do that. So this is probably arguably the most, if you could get any value, this would be your most important one. If you got BA ratio and a triglyceride, you get a whole lot of information yourself. And then these inflammatory markers, much, much harder for you guys to get, but they're looking at other causes of cardiovascular disease beyond lipids, because it's not all cholesterol that causes cardiovascular disease. It's inflammation, right? So, so these are all numbers that help allow us to look more at inflammatory markers. But again, hard for you guys to get.
Pretty important. We can get homocysteine. We can't get PLAC or MPO.
To myeloperoxidase. And these are interestingly, lots of times, like the inflammatory stuff. One of the things post-COVID and even post some of the COVID shots is that that we're seeing an elevation in some of these cardiac inflammatory markers.
Yeah, myeloperoxidase.
Myeloperoxidase goes way up a lot of times. So we know it's one of the reasons that we get a lot of cardiac stuff. With COVID and COVID vaccines. This marker right here also, it's called Lp(a), except it's not the apolipoprotein A. This is Lp(a). It's a lipoprotein(a). It's a completely genetically inherited particle that's independently a risk factor of disease. So lots of times this doesn't get measured. And I will tell you, here in the US, they don't measure because they say there's nothing we can do about it. So the problem is this will not be affected by diet. It will not be affected by exercise. It is simply a bad gene that you inherited, but it markedly increases your cardiovascular risk. And there is things that we know will help it. Even though there's not a good drug to treat it yet, there are things we know will at least bring it down. Niacin, for one, can help bring it down. We'll use a combination of something called low-dose leucine with niacin, with that other thing we talked about, citronel. So there are supplements that can be useful here. It's important to know because this creates more clotting. So these people will have more risks of blood clots post-surgery. So those are people you want to be more attuned to at least taking like a baby aspirin every night, right? They would do a baby aspirin at bedtime. So if your Lp(a) is high, you want to keep the blood a little on the thinner side, and you want to keep other inflammation low. You want to keep your triglycerides low. You want to eliminate all the other risk factors, and we will see it come down, right? So when you look at him, interestingly, he inherited this from his dad because he's at 29. If you don't have this gene, like me, your number will be really low. It'll be 10 or less usually. Usually, if you have the gene, so he's probably heterozygous. He's got one good gene, one bad gene. But he's a little on that higher end, right? But he's got his other factors look really good. But my daughter, on the other hand, who's young too, like 28, has a much higher Lp(a). My husband has a much higher Lp(a). So those are ones we really have to work on because they inherited the bad side. So this is something that time will help. I'm sure we'll come up with a drug at some point. They're actually working on something that actually shuts off the gene, but it's important to know because you can markedly reduce your risk, particularly post
with aspirin
by taking aspirin. Really, just taking aspirin, right? So you just take it.
Is that to do with the coagulability of the blood?
Think about makes the cholesterol kind of stick. I always like to think of it as like almost a gum. It makes everything really sticky, and it makes you get much more blood clotting. So strokes, heart attacks, blood clots.
So a young lady should not be on birth control if she's got this.
Yeah, exactly. So this is oral estrogens, not transdermal estrogens, but oral estrogens will markedly increase clot risk. If you also had the LP(a), those are some of you really would not want on birth control pills, right?
Exactly. And
so
we
those
can't get this.
It's important to know it, but can't get it,
Well, maybe we can.
A little harder.
Try again.
So other things, if you look at other things that really are important, and it's metabolic health. It's, are you trending to become a type 2 diabetic, right?
Yeah, so, which is just epidemic,
right? Even not fat people, right? We always think about, type 2 diabetics are all overweight,
Yeah.
I see a lot of people who have bad metabolic markers, even though they're thin and fit looking, right?
And this is this throws people off, and especially in elderly people where they're slim, they're frail maybe, right. and nobody's suspecting that they've got metabolic dysfunction going on, and no one's looking at their HbA1c and their insulin levels and their diabetes risk. And I know with my dad, I lost my dad a couple of years ago. He did not look overweight. He was big, strong, strapping man, and that hid the visceral fat quite well, and so we didn't know that there was this underlying problem going on in the background. Pre-diabetes. I don't even like that word, because either you're diabetic or you're not diabetic, really.
Right.
You've got a metabolic problem going on. And if you look at, I'd want to say 80% of the population over 40 has got some metabolic brokenness going on.
I agree. And they don't know it, right? You think, I'm fine, I'll eat well, blah, blah, blah. My mom the same way as your dad. My parents went to the gym every day. She was very thin, certainly did not look like a diabetic. And you looked at her numbers, and she was horrible, but nobody really treated it. And she, and she died of dementia, and she died, she probably a multi-infarct dementia, probably related to this poor metabolic control, but nobody ever really addressed it. They and they wouldn't listen to me. So,
and they won't listen. That's the problem with your own
parents, right? So we looked at that, when somebody just does a spot glucose on you. So when you look at that metabolic panel and just as a spot glucose, it's a moment in time. So, a spot glucose, obviously, if you're fasted and it's super high, it's disconcerting, but it's still a moment in time. Stress can raise your glucose, lots of things. They did a study where they basically measured glucose right before somebody had their blood drawn, right after they had their blood drawn, and it went up 20 points just because of the stress of the blood being drawn. So don't spend too much time on this, but this is the important number. I think you guys can get this, can't you, Lisa, or not?
So much? Yep, we can.
So hemoglobin A1C is what we call glycosylated hemoglobin. That's going to be the marker you guys want to look at that says this is sort of a 4-month look at glucose, right? This is what my average glucose is running. And, somebody will actually your doctor's going to start paying attention when that number is above 6.5,
Yeah, which is too high.
And maybe if it's a good doctor, maybe above 6, but honestly, anything above 5.6, you're trending towards type 2 diabetes. Above 5.6. Which is, you can still see well within the range of, until you get diagnosed with your diabetes when it's above 7. That's when someone's going to treat you. We start treating when people are above 5.6. We start actually saying, okay, we got to get this under control. And that might be diet, and it might be, other things, but lots of times
stress reduction.
You've got to get that under control, right? It's so important. And we won't go into this because you guys, that's going to be less important, but also if you can look at things like insulin. So people who have high insulin levels, right? What does insulin do? It causes fat storage, right? So if my insulin, so remember what type 2 diabetes is, you guys, is that insulin, your body becomes resistant to insulin. It doesn't recognize it. So our body's designed to, I eat something, right? Glucose rises, insulin comes into play, glucose goes down, I'm fine. Well, if I just keep always eating glucose, my body becomes insulin resistant. It doesn't recognize insulin. So now the insulin has to go higher to bring the glucose down, and then higher to bring the glucose down. And then finally your insulin's way up here. It may still be keeping the glucose down. So these numbers may all look fine still, right? Because I'm still recognizing it, but it took a lot of insulin to get my glucose down. And high insulin is really one of the issues that's going to cause brain problems and eye problems and kidney problems. So you always want to see the insulin level ideally below 6, right? Not 25. I mean, if your insulin levels are above 12, you're going to have a hard time losing fat. Insulin's telling your body to store fat. You want to get that number below 6.
Yep.
You know,
and this is just like, this is one of the areas that's completely neglected, and it's so easy. Yeah. Like the insulin resistance is sort of you're on a path, it's going up over time, and your blood sugars can still be looking good. Your HbA1c can still be looking good, but your insulin resistance is going up. So I reckon it should be on all tests, and it should be done. It should be our first indicator that things are going awry, and that we can jump in and we can start to do something at this level.
No, I have a lot of patients who they still have hemoglobin A1Cs that are well controlled, especially younger patients, right? Their hemoglobin A1C was still uncontrolled. Then I get their insulin, it's 28. So they are insulin, they're still recognizing insulin, but it's taking more and more and more. And that's, I have a patient who's very young and, and has super high insulin levels like that. So we've got to get her insulin levels down, because that's the start of everything wrong. And then, unless you know this, you might look great when your doctor just does this. So, again, a little harder test to get, but, but it's so valuable to have that level, and and start addressing it before it becomes a big issue. So again, these are markers that really everybody needs, and we'll just kind of quickly, and we're running out of time here, but when you look at things like thyroid, when your doctor looks at thyroid, the only thing they're ever going to look at is this, what we call TSH.
Yeah, which is another pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, which is horrible. That's what your doctors are all going to do, right?
Yeah.
Thyroid stimulating hormone is produced by the pituitary. So when the thyroid starts getting a little sluggish, the pituitary is like, come on, buddy, you got to work harder. And it makes more thyroid stimulating hormone. And then the thyroid produces its hormones, which are actually the free T4 and free T3. Those are the most important numbers, particularly this free T3. So the free T3 starts getting low, it means the thyroid is a little bit sluggish, and it's not ideal for the brain or for the heart when the free T3 levels start dropping. So you really need all these pieces of information. But even if you just get a TSH, optimal TSH is less than 2.5. Your doctor's not going to mention it until it's up around 5.
Yeah.
And then your thyroid's sluggish, right? So we know that optimal. So you can just look at that number, even if that's all your doctor got, that TSH, and go, doc, I don't feel great, and this number is a little on the higher end. It's 3.5. Could we maybe try a tiny bit of thyroid and see if I feel better? And maybe they'll agree or not. But that's where you need, a doctor who's going to work with you, who you can discuss things with, and because if I'm sluggish and fat,
Thyroid is so complicated. There's so many areas, from the pituitary through to the thyroid, through the liver, the conversion, the receptor. So it does take a lot more work, and doctors don't have a lot of time to dig in. But this is one of the crucial areas where you get people in their 40s and 50s typically feeling like shit because their thyroids are out, and they're not being diagnosed as such. And there's a supplement side where we can support our body with the right foods and the right nutrients and things to get that looking better, as well as going down the T4 and T3 pathways.
Right. Yeah, so sometimes a little selenium or iodine, things like that, can be really helpful just to perk the thyroid up, right? So
zinc,
eating things like zinc, So sometimes just eat, like you could add a little algae, little kelp algae, like seaweed crackers, things like that into your diet. Sometimes that can help. Using iodized salt sometimes can help. So there are things you can do that even if you can't get the supplements or you can't get thyroid medication, there are things you can do if you set TSH a little bit low. But yeah, ideally you want to find a physician or a practitioner who knows this, because Lisa's right. Thyroid is a little bit complicated, but don't also, neglect. It is so critical to cardiac health and brain health. One big study that came out of, was either China or Sweden, I can't remember, showed that when free T3 levels were dropping and TSH started climbing, that those people had much more cognitive decline. The thyroid is really important for brain function. So you look at a lot of elderly people who are cognitively declining, some of that could simply be fixed by correcting the thyroid. So it's again, important to know, not just from your energy levels and fat loss, as everybody thinks about with thyroid. It's important for your heart and it's important for your brain. So,
absolutely.
So again, look at your TSH. If it's above 2.5, see if you can get your doctor to order more, better look at, to look at that. So again, simple simple tests can still give you a lot of information if you interpret them the right way.
Yeah.
And you have to have that knowledge.
We do tests, like we unfortunately have to pay for them, but we can get the whole panels over here. And that's really, really valuable. Even things like reverse T3 being,
right.
Your T3 might be fine, but your reverse T3 is so high. And so therefore, things are, it is complicated, but it's so important for your whole hormone household, your HPA axis, all of these things are interrelated. So this cursory, oh, you're fine, you're in the ranges, and this is the problem, and we have the power, and this is why giving you guys this information and why I'm so grateful to Dr. Youth for sharing this direct to our clients is just so key.
Right. And again, guys, you don't know what you're not looking for, right?
Yeah.
So like I said, I feel pretty darn good. I'm fit, I'm healthy, I can take care. I feel, if you ask me, I think there's nothing wrong with me. Yeah, my labs not so much, right? There's things I need to work on. And and we're probably the most neglectful sometimes of our own health.
Yeah.
Taking care of a lot of people, Lisa's got a lot on her plate, and sometimes we get neglected. And so you're also like, ooh, geez, I haven't looked at my labs for a year and there's things that I need to work on. So, so it's important. Again, it's important even like at Courtney's age, at, labs we just looked at, there's little things in there. I can tell that whether your immune system's going downhill. I can tell whether your kidneys and liver and nutritional panels. So much information, get that knowledge. It's right there for you, and then work on it, because that's the way you're going to live forever, is to keep the bad stuff from attacking you.
Yeah. How not to die.
Yeah,
learn this stuff. Put your effort into it. It is difficult. It's complicated, but it is. We have access to wonderful people like you now that are sharing this, and this is just absolutely crucial. And it can be an absolute game changer, even if you pick up something,
right?
That then you can go to your doctor and go, "Hey, double look at this, please," and then maybe they'll dig a bit deeper.
Yeah.
And change doctors. It's easier said than done.
Yeah, but if you can't talk to your doctor, right?
Yeah, then
you need to find somebody who, either
listens.
People like you to advocate, to help you out, or find practitioners. There are, like I said, virtual medicine has created a whole new world for people, because you do have access to so many more people. Like we have people all over the world. And so there's a lot more access now because of virtual health, right?
Yeah, and functional medicine and integrated is on the march, which is fantastic, and this is.
But there's lots of people. There's people like you too, Lisa, who certainly who you can turn to, and I know who you can turn to who do understand this stuff and can at least help direct you when because a lot of stuff, especially if you catch it early on, is simple to fix.
Yeah, that's what I do. A lot of my clients, when it gets out of my scope of practice and what I'm able to do, pass them on to you, pass them on to whoever's the relevant person for that person. And again, this is a growing area of need. It's absolutely crucial, rather than just going, I'm fine, and sticking your head in the sand like I have an auntie who does this. She just, I don't want to know, because it's not happening. And I'm like, until
that's a really common attitude, right? Is I really don't want to know that there's something wrong with me. And what we'd advocate is most of these things, if you catch them earlier, are very fixable, right?
Fixable. Yeah, absolutely. Courtney, are we on track?
Awesome. Yes, we have 1 minute left. You guys did great. No, that was awesome, guys. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know, even though I'm in this world, and every time I hear about these different biomeasures and hear about these different metrics, I always learn something new. As Dr. Harris said, we just did our labs, in all of the staff here at BLI, we just did our labs, and I'm in my late 20s, and, most of people would say, oh, she's young and healthy. There were things in there that I need to work on. And personally, that's a big goal of mine, is how do you get more young people into this world, right? How do you start measuring and taking control of this stuff earlier, so that you're preventing it, rather than, you're having to treat these things down the road, right? Which is a lot of what we all see in our practices, of these people who, if only they had kind of paid attention 10 years before, they'd be in a different boat. But no matter where you are, right, you can always kind of find things to help you and get started on.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point, because, a lot of people who listen to these things are in their 50s and starting to get older. And that's because when you start thinking about it, if you've got kids, encourage them to start getting into this in their 20s, because you can you can prevent a lot of stuff. I mean, I didn't learn this stuff until I was older, right? It would have been nice to know it when I was 20, you know?
Yeah,
So,
me too.
you look at the damage you did, right? The damage that's done, right? It's like, we hope we can reverse a lot of it, but certainly you're in a better place if you know it when you're in your 20s and you prevent it from happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm very grateful for you both for helping me on my journey. Well, I guess we'll kind of wrap it up here. I just want to, thank you everyone that tuned in, and thank you for everyone who's watching this recording down the line. Next, we will be focusing on research. So the topic is research, and that's kind of twofold. One, Dr. Earth and Lisa will be sharing some of the most, the more cutting edge research that is out there, specifically in the world of cellular medicine. I know we talk about that a lot, but at BLI, we often say cellular medicine is sort of the evolution of functional medicine, really what's going on at the cellular level, what's happening to your mitochondria. So I know they'll be discussing some cool things there, some research, some findings there. And then secondly, how do you actually go find research that is, worth paying attention to? There's so much information out there now around the space, but a lot of times it's not really high quality research. It's not vetted. It's not, going through the checks and balances. So both Lisa and Dr. dive deep into research on their own, trying to find and sort through this world. So they're going to share some tips and tricks that they've found on how to vet the science and the research. So thank you guys again for your time.
Bye guys. Thank you.
See you, Ron.
Thanks everybody.